Woohoo. We are streaming. Hello, folk over on the live stream. Nobody just yet, so I'm assuming it's a bit of a quiet day. I may not have very much participation. Okay, well, no matter. We will go ahead and do the recording bit. So the first step on our way to Blueprint emancipation and going towards C++, we are going to be working on the character, a very central component, a very important component, and one which is actually quite messy in Blueprint. So currently, if we go and have a look at the state of our character, I'm going to go into dynamic character behavior, character BP over here. So we want to be using more C++ in this project, as a lot of you have shouted about. But Blueprint is okay, and it's nice, and it can give you rapid prototyping, but C++ is still what this course is all about, and that's why we're going to be, in this lecture, converting at least part of a major chunk of our project, the character blueprint, into C++. So that is the first item on my checklist, and that is what we're going to be doing most of this lecture. But first off, the first step is going to be creating that character class and reparenting our character blueprint to that new character class. So let's hop over into the Unreal Editor. I've got my character, BP character, open here, and I wanted to point out to you a couple of things. First off, our character settings, obviously the parent class here is character. So when we create our C++ class, we want it to be based off of that parent class, so that reparenting is going to be a breeze. Now, what are we going to be trying to convert in this lecture? We're going to be looking at two things primarily. The first is creating this component hierarchy entirely in C++, so that we don't have to mess around in Blueprint to do that, and also it gives us nice references to all those components in C++, making our code much easier to write. We've done this before in Battle Tank, so particularly with the projectile class. So if you need to refresh your memory on how we do things like default sub-objects, then you want to go back to those lectures and find out. Here we'll just be doing a little overview and reviewing that, but I'm mostly going to assume that you know how to create default sub-objects. The other thing we're going to be doing is implementing this fire method in C++. We're going to see how, in actual fact, it looks a lot nicer in C++ in the end, and how it's just quite easy to write. But we're going to be doing this by exposing Blueprint methods, as again you have done in the past. So if you're unsure how to do that, do go back and refresh your knowledge now, and then come back to this lecture where you're going to be challenged to use that knowledge. So it might have been a little while, so now would be a good time to refresh. Pause the video if you like it, go and refresh. Remember the timestamp, and then come back here. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and create a new class. So I go up to File, and then I go to, oh no, I'm in the wrong place. Need to be in my first person map to go to File. Then I go to New C++ class. I want my parent class to be character because, as we said, that is the parent of the BP character as it currently stands. And I'm going to go through next. I'm going to actually create myself a new folder to put the character into, because if we look at the folders of our C++ as it currently stands, we've got an NPC and a player. Now, we know that NPC and player were from the previous model, and now that we have NPC and player under one blueprint called character, we probably want to create a new folder and call it character. And I'm going to select that new folder, which unfortunately it sometimes gets the wrong end of the stick with the naming there. So I'm just going to go through and find that folder again, unfortunately. And where is my Unreal projects? Not in there. Ah, yes, under courses, Unreal. And this is the one, sources, character. There you go. So not new folder, character. And what am I going to call the character? Well, that's a dumb name, my character. I don't want that. I'm going to call it a mannequin because that seems to be the thing that ties together the art style of that character. So it's going to be mannequin. It's going to create the C++ and the header file for me. And I'm going to go ahead and create that class and let it compile the C++ code for me. That's right. Stop the recording for a bit. You can leave in peace.
See you soon, enjoy.
See you soon, you too. Okay, so my compile is complete, and if I head on over to Visual Studio, you can see that it's showing me those new files it has created. Now, I'm actually not going to write this C++ in front of you because you've seen C++ been written like this before. You know all the basic components. I'm not teaching you anything new if I were to do that. So I'm going to actually leave it up to you as a challenge, but I will give you some hints and tips that will help you along the way. The first hint and tip is that if you go to Testing Ground Sources Project Player and the first person character, both the CPP and the header file, you'll notice that this actually has a great outline of how to do a character class in C++. So use this for inspiration as much as you can in the following challenge. The other thing to have a look at is the blueprint that we've currently got, and how, translating those blueprint concepts, it's a really good skill to go, well, what is this in blueprint? How can I turn this into C++? For example, all these items in the component hierarchy, those would be great if you just stuck them as default sub-objects and you did things like attaching them correctly. And you can see examples of that, as I said, in the first person example character class. So you can do it like that by looking at that, or looking back at previous lectures in Battle Tank and seeing how that's done and how we do default sub-objects in that case. So, and obviously gun actor and spawning actors and attaching actors and so on. How do we do all of that? Well, again, first person gun will show you a lot of that. And creating the fire blueprint method. So that is the challenge. It's going to be to convert the component hierarchy, primarily the component hierarchy, also that firing method. And here is your spec for the challenge. I want you to go ahead, do it however you like. I don't care if it looks different to the code that I'm going to show you after this challenge is complete. If it looks different, that's even better, really, because you used your own solution. And as long as it does this and you're happy with how it does this, I'm happy. So, first thing, both the mesh and the camera should be inherited. What do I mean by that? When you look at our blueprint, you can see that some of these components are in brackets inherited. That means that the C++, the parent class, has defined these components, not this blueprint. And that's what I want. I want for the first-person camera and the first-person arms to be inherited. We don't need this camera boom and player camera anymore, so those can also just disappear. You can remove them entirely if you like. Then what next? Well, up next, I would like to only need the first-person camera. So, as I said, remove the third-person boom arm and all those kind of components. We don't need it, we don't actually use it, so there's no point it being there in the C++ code. All components in their correct places, well, that's going to do with you positioning the camera and the arms and the first-person arms correctly in the scene so that when you play, the camera is in the position of the third person's head and the arms look correctly positioned with the gun in hand and so on. And no fire method in the blueprint, so I would like you to have that implemented entirely in C++. And the weapon firing should work, so that means that the gun actor should be spawned in your C++. So this is a bit of a breakdown. Again, take inspiration from that first person character. There's a lot in there that can help you out. So pause the video and have a go at this slightly harder challenge than usual. Jake, it's Sam, actually. I know the thumbnail is a little bit misleading. I do need to change that thumbnail, at least for when I record. But at least now the title shouldn't say Ben producing videos live. Have you been watching the stream the whole way through, Jake? Okay, so welcome back. I hope you had a good time with that challenge, and I'd really like to see how you solve this problem. So go ahead and share, in fact, pause the video right now and share in the forum, in the community, the way that you converted the blueprint to the C++ and what challenges you encountered. Okay, so now, without further ado, we're going to dive into what I've done. Now, you can find what I've done over on GitHub, so the link is in your resources. But let me bring that window over for you. Here it is. This is on a prototype branch. I've got both the header and the C++, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy from my prototype rather than have you watch everything I do, what character by character, all the mistakes and fiddling around that I make, because in this case you have done all of that before and there wouldn't really be much learning in it for you. So I'm going to copy over the header file. I'm going to copy over the C++ from my existing prototype, and then we're going to compile those, see what it does, and I'm going to do a little code review with you just to show you what I've done, why I've done it, and how it works. And you can compare, contrast, and potentially update your code as well if you want to, but don't feel like your code has to match up one-to-one to continue with the section. As long as you fulfill those criteria on the challenge slide, that's more than enough, and I'm very happy with you going on and using your own code. In fact, you should generally go on to use your own code. So I'm going to compile my C++, just let it do that very quickly. And then once we've compiled the C++, we're going to reparent the blueprint and see if everything works out. Hopefully you reparented the blueprint as part of your challenge as well. So the compile is complete. I'm going to go into my class settings to parent class, and I'm going to search for that mannequin class that we just created. And there it is. I will select it and watch it do the reparent. And you'll notice that it will complain about fire because there is a fire method already in use. That's because I created a blueprint callable method in my C++, and if that means now I can't have this fire method, which means that I need to go and remove it, which I'm trying to do. Hopefully there's a way to delete these links, or just delete the function after the fact. So it's saying that the overridden function is not compatible. I can't see it, unfortunately. It's under weapon. There you go, because I put it under the category weapon. You'll see this in the code, that if I go to my mannequin header file and look for my fire method, here it is, then the category for the blueprint callable U function is weapon. That's why it's folding under weapon here. I'm actually going to delete that entirely. That should stop that from complaining. See if my blueprint compiles now. It does seem to compile, just with the warning that we've had previously. I'm going to delete these components that we no longer need, the camera boom arm through to the gun actor. If I delete those, you can see that they have now been replaced by a mesh 1p inherited, as I said in the requirements for the challenge. I said that I wanted these components for mesh and camera both to be inherited, and now they are, and we've got the first person camera component as well. And if we go to the viewport, you can see I've carefully positioned everything such that my mesh and my camera, actually they're not in the right places, so let's just correct that. This is something that you may need to do as well, is just position things in the blueprint. I'm still going to leave things to be positioned in the blueprint because it's really quite tough to position things just through using the numbers of the location transforms in the C++. Okay, so, and configuring our components is another important step. So our mesh 1p needs to be configured with a skeletal mesh. So I'm going to go and get the SK mannequin arms as a skeletal mesh for that component. There they are. Now they look weird because they don't have an animator, so I need to get the animation blueprint. So it's anim class. I need to find that it's actually ABP-FP, the first person animation blueprint. There you go, we've got the arms there now. And if I move my camera slightly to be coincident with the player's head position and play, we need to fix a compile error. Yes, blueprint self, no connection target, what's that about? Okay, this is updating the camera rotation. I don't think we need this function anymore. It's no longer necessary. So I can go ahead and hit play without that function. Still more compiler errors. Let's make sure it compiles. Update camera rotations being called in event tick, so I'll remove that. Make sure it compiles. Okay, now that my blueprint compiles, I can play and check that, there you go. We've got our arms seemingly in the right place and everything else seems to be okay. Oh, I've got a bit of a freeze there, but I'm just going to exit. Oh dear, Unreal crashed. Well, that's a bit of a shame, isn't it? Let's open it up again and hope that it wasn't a null pointer error. I'll fire up my U project again. Yes, Jake, it is new content coming up for the Unreal course and the end of testing grounds. Okay, so with that crash, I'm just going to go ahead and restore these selected items, or hopefully it will let me restore them. It seems like it won't. Nope, so I'm going to have to skip the restore. And now it's letting me restore them. Okay, so here we are. Oh, damn. Yeah, I think it was actually my fault. I think there's a null pointer error in the C++, so I need to be a bit more careful about that. So, okay. Ugh, not configuring my C++ properly, that's the problem. Well, it's nicely restored my state to what it was before, so yeah, looks like it's completely gone back and wiped it. So I think if source tree corroborates that, yes it does, then I will stash these changes and try the challenge solution again. This can be a real bummer when doing Unreal videos, is that it really does like to crash and lose all your work. So, and that's really hard when you're trying to record things in one take. Sorry, Jake. Yes, that is what it's like to make a video. Especially in the Unreal course. In the Unity course, it seems to be a little bit easier and things don't go wrong as much. But Unreal does like to throw some curveballs at us, and we just keep knocking them back, but it's still difficult, challenging. I hope it's not too painful to watch. You know what, Jake? I'm just going to start from the beginning again, because this is not fun. I'm trying to figure out what to do to restart this video in a correct state, I'm just going to do it right from scratch again. So you just witnessed a rehearsal. Yep, exactly. Day in the life. Right. Excuse me. Needed to re-record a video? Yes. Probably every other video. Hey, dude.
Sorry,
Just in the middle of a live stream, but
that's okay.
in the middle of a live stream, but restarting a recording because Unreal crashed.
Oh, okay. Are you live streaming your recording?
Yeah.
How's that going?
People are having sympathy for me having crashes.
I understand. I can see what's involved. I'll do my call elsewhere then.
That sounds good.
I'll go and take this downstairs.
Oh, word, this parsing solution files takes forever. Okay. Sorry, this is a rather boring live stream at the moment, apart from having been able to see some of the difficulties involved with recording videos of something that likes to crash. Unfortunately, it is my code that seems to have done it. I think I had a null pointer access in there somewhere. If I actually go over to GitHub, I can probably show you the line. This line here, I'm fairly sure is the one that did it, because we didn't have a gun set, which is always an issue. Maybe I should update that. This really shouldn't have it crashing. Yeah, unfortunately it just wants to rescan all of the engine files. So here you've got in this folder a load of C++, which Visual Studios then needs to go through and index every single time, which is because we throw away all the compilation caches every time we do a video so that we have a good clean state and there's no unknowns, but it does mean having to wait for Visual Studio to redo its parsing of all the files. I need to rebuild the lighting, all these things that now I don't want to store in version control because they're incredibly heavyweight, need to be recompiled. That all takes time. But it's okay. It is a very powerful engine and does do some pretty cool looking stuff. And you get to use C++, which is fun. Fun when it's not causing you null pointer errors. You can do it on Mac though, and you've got Xcode on Mac, which is also a great IDE. And yeah, no, there's no restriction to PC. I'm just using PC here because Macs don't exist with powerful enough GPUs really for doing things like VR. So this is my PC that I do most of my work on, which is VR capable. It's a laptop, and you can just about hear the fans actually. They're not really up at full throttle. I'll put my... Yeah, you can just about hear it when I put the microphone near the fans, what kind of a noise it's making, trying to process all those files, but now it's gone down again. Yeah, you can't really tell the difference on the microphone, but it has got quieter again. It's quite good for a laptop. I'm really quite impressed with this one. It's an MSI GS63VR, and it's quite good build quality, very powerful. Couldn't find anything as powerful in the Mac lineup. We used to use Macs exclusively, and now we don't. Mostly because of lack of GPUs. Not really, quite a few generations behind in terms of GPU technology, which is a shame because I like Macs, but there you go. Okay, I think we are back and ready to record. Only a minor amount of farting around. So while Blueprint is great for us prototyping and getting lots of stuff done quickly in Unreal, obviously this is a C++ oriented course, and we've been doing too much Blueprint, and you guys have let us know that, so we are going to be converting some of the major components back into C++ and making sure that you've got the skills to do that with everything if you want to. And obviously there's benefits to that. You can collaborate more easily on C++. There's speed benefits, although now we can compile blueprints down to C++ as well, so that kind of takes the wind out of that one's sails a little bit. But the point is, in this lecture, we are going to be converting our character or for the most part, to C++. So the first item on our list is to create and reparent a character subclass so that our BP character is based off a character. So let's start on that check item. So I'll go over to Unreal and I will launch up my character BP. And from my character BP, you can see that the parent class up here in the top right is a character of a character class. That's what we're going to base our C++ class from, so that when we reparent, we're going to be reparenting something that has the same ancestor and will basically be mostly the same as this blueprint class. What we're going to be doing is trying to replace this fire method, which we want to be able to do in C++ with a U function, something callable from blueprint, and we're going to be replacing this component hierarchy with some default sub-objects. Basically, it's going to be such that we can create all those objects in C++, have references to them in C++, so that we can call and use them in our C++ code. So the first step to doing that is going to be creating the class, as this check item currently says, create the class and reparent this BP character to that class. So I'm going to head over to my first person example map, File, New C++ class, Character, because we wanted to base it off of character so that we have the same ancestor. Go to Next. Now I'm going to choose a different folder here, and I'm going to create myself a new folder, because here we have a weapons subfolder, but we've also got a player and NPC, and we know that player and NPC is now outdated. We've merged those into one character. So I'm going to create a character folder. I'm going to select that folder, or try to select that folder. Sometimes you have to select and deselect to get the right folder name down here at the bottom. I'm not entirely sure why that happens. And my character is a terrible name, so we're going to call it something else. I'm going to call it Mannequin, because that's the thing, that is the robotic character that we've actually got, is a mannequin, and I think that's more descriptive than calling it my character or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and create that class, and we've got to wait for the C++ to compile. And once the C++ is compiled, we're going to go in and reparent our blueprint to that new C++. It's not going to change much, because essentially it is a vanilla child of the character superclass. So it will have all of the same behavior. So the compilation is finished. I'm going to go over into BP character now, and I am going to my class settings, finding the parent class, and I'm changing that parent class to Mannequin. There we go. It's now in my list of classes that can be used. So I can now try and compile my blueprint, save and compile it, and if I play, everything should be exactly as before, with very loud volume. I'm just going to reduce the volume a little bit so that your ears don't suffer. There we go. And okay, so the next step is going to be converting this hierarchy and this fire function into C++. In fact, if you go over into Visual Studio, you can see that this base character class has been created for us. Now, I'm not going to go over how to create default sub-objects and how to create U-functions. That stuff's all been covered in previous lectures. If you're a bit rusty on how any of that's done, then you can go through. Remember, you can use GitHub to search through for instances of the code where it's being used. You can always find the GitHub links at every lecture, every resource in every lecture that has a GitHub link. So you can use that to search our repos for the code use, to find which lecture you're looking for, and you can find out how to do a sub-object. Again, you can refresh that knowledge. But also another way to refresh is if you go into the testing grounds sources, SO5 testing grounds and player, then the first person character .h and .cpp both have some very useful code for you. It tells you essentially how to do most of what we want to do in this challenge coming up. It tells you, it shows you how to create default sub-objects, how to set up attachment between sub-objects, how to position things, how to set all sorts of settings on the different meshes, how to spawn a gun actor. That's very useful. And it also shows you, well, basically how to bind fire. There's lots more in there. You don't have to implement the whole of first-person character at all, but it is a useful source of information and useful source of refreshing knowledge. So let's go ahead, and we've done our reparenting step. So I'm going to check that off my Sublime text checklist. And the next thing up is the challenge to convert the component hierarchy and, well, the fire function, but I haven't written that down. So how are we going to do this? Well, you can do it however you like. I want it to end up in C++ rather than Blueprint, but you've got free reign. You've just got to conform to the following specification if you want it to work going forward. But if at the end you have a different solution to me, that is great. That means you've been thinking for yourself and doing it your own way. So I want to have both the meshes, the third person and first person meshes, and camera, the first person camera, should be inherited. And let me just show you over in Unreal what I mean. You notice that the arrow component, this mesh component, and the capsule component are all inherited. So what we're going to actually have to do is remove these components that we've added into the blueprint. I'm going to do that right now. And we're going to have to do that in the C++ to create those components as default sub-objects. I'm going to save my character blueprint here. The other thing I'm going to remove is the fire function, because we're going to do that in C++ too. So that's the next thing on your checklist. Well, no, actually the next thing is that you only need the FP character. So the first person camera is the only component you're going to need here. You're not going to need the third person boom arm as well, because we don't actually use this anywhere in our project. All components need to end up in the correct places. So the correct attachments, you're going to need to position things inside the blueprint so that the arms are in the right place when you view them. They're going to need to be set up with the right animations and then the right meshes. That's something that typically we want to do in Blueprint rather than in C++, although you could do it in C++ as well if you fancy. No fire method, so that's what I was referring to. That's why I've deleted the fire method from the blueprint. And the weapon firing should work, so we need to write the code to do that, to spawn the gun in the hands of the first person mesh, and for that fire on fire to be called from the C++. So pause the video and have a go at this challenge. Okay, welcome back. So you've had a spec, you've had a go. I hope it's gone well, and if it has and you've created some of your own code, then please go ahead and share it in our community site. The links are, as usual, in the video resources. Go and share what you've created and how you've solved it, any difficulties you encountered. Share with the other students and let us know how you've done. Now, what I'm going to do in this video is a little bit different. I'm not actually going to go through and show you step by step all the code that I've written and how I've written it. What I'm going to do instead is pull the code. You've got this code in the resources if you want to look at it for reference. But this is the code from one of my prototype branches. And I'm going to just pull that across for us and put this code that I've written previously into the files that I've just generated. So here's my mannequin.h. I'm just going to populate that with my prototype code and the mannequin C++. I'm going to go ahead and populate that too. So I'm going to copy paste in here and go ahead and start Unreal compiling while I tell you a little bit about what I've done. So here we're doing this because you've seen all this before. There wouldn't be much to teach you if I was to show you all of it from scratch, but we're going to do a bit of a code review together. So that is my last item on the checkbox, is to review my mannequin C++. And that's what we're going to do. So let me take you through. In our header file, first of all, we have a pretty standard setup. We've got a begin play, we've got a tick, we've got the setup player input component, which was set up by default with our character class. Nothing new there. Now, we've got a U property. The indentation's been messed up a little bit by me copying and pasting, but we've got a U property, which is the blueprint, the subclass of a gun. So it's the subclass of this C++ class, and we're going to be linking that up to our BP gun blueprint so that when we spawn the gun, it's going to be the right instance of gun. The other thing here we've got is a U function blueprint callable with a category weapon called fire. That's what's going to be called by our animation code when we want to fire. Now, we are going to change that architecture a little bit, but for now, I've kept that architecture in the C++, and we can re-architect and refactor later. Then in my private components, I have got a mesh first person, because the other mesh is already part of the third person mesh is already part of the character. So we just needed to add a first person skeletal mesh on top of that. We've also got a first person camera component, and we've got a link to that gun instance so that it allows us to call the fire method when we have the fire method called on us. So let's go into our C++ and see how that's actually working. In our constructor, we do our default subobject dance and create a uCamera component. We set up attachment, so it's attached to the capsule component. If I go ahead and show you the blueprint character, you can see that the first person camera component is indeed a child of the capsule component. That's what that's doing. We've set up a relative location. I've actually taken this relative location from that first person character C++. You can see it's exactly the same. In fact, most of this setup is quite similar. We've got a use pawn control rotation, so it rotates with the pawn. We've got a first person mesh being set up, which is a skeletal mesh. It is owner only sees. We've done that before in Blueprint, but now we're doing it in C++. We set up the attachment, so it's a child of the first person camera, and you can pretty much figure out the rest. It's about dynamic shadows, it's about positioning. Again, mostly taken from the first person character.c++. Okay. Now, in begin play, this is where it gets interesting. We can't do it in constructor because we can't spawn blueprints and attach them in the constructor, but we can do it in begin play. And what we're doing, what are we spawning? We're spawning the gun, of course. We're spawning it from that instance of the gun blueprint that was configured. We're attaching it to our first person mesh, and particularly to this grip point here. You can see there's a few rules for the attachment, like snap to target, which basically says put it in the hands, don't let it reposition and keep the world position. That would just be weird. And we are setting an animation instance on the gun, which allows the gun to animate our mesh, which is actually the right way around. That's how we wanted to architect it in the architecture we talked about in the last lecture. So when you fire the gun is going to animate your arms and give you kickback. So this, we'll see in just a second, is a very helpful feature and has actually given our first person mesh animation again when firing, which we previously had lost. Okay, and then finally, our U function down here at the bottom, we're calling on fire on the gun. And as you can see, there's no casting having to go on here because of the types all being right in the first place, because when we spawn an actor, it's of type a gun, and so on. It just seems to work, which is great. Great news. Okay, so now if I go over to my BP character, you'll notice I have some issues compiling. Why do I have some issues compiling? Because I have an outdated function here called update camera rotation, which is using the camera we previously had, that boom arm camera. We don't need it anymore, so I'm going to delete the whole function, update camera rotation. I'll find it over here in my blueprint pane. I'll delete. If I try and compile again, it will complain that that function was called on event tick. Great, well, we can delete that bit of blueprint as well. We don't no longer need it, so I can compile. Okay, now there's a little bit of setup we have to do because our C++ in the header file had exposed a few bits of configuration variable. In particular, well, the only configuration variable really is this gun blueprint. So let's configure the gun blueprint. I'll select my BP character over in my components hierarchy right at the top. And under here I've got setup, gun blueprint. I can select my BP gun. You see, because it's clever, it knows that it has to be a subclass of a gun. It only shows me those two options, so I can choose my BP gun. That is great. Now, one other thing I have to set up. If I go to my viewport, you see I can't see my first-person arms. That's because I haven't set up a mesh, a skeletal mesh, on my mesh 1P component. So I select the mesh 1P component, I go over to my skeletal mesh, and I add the SK mannequin arms. You'll notice they're in the wrong position because they don't have an animator. So I will go up to the animation section. Under anim class, I select my ABP FP, the animation blueprint first person. That puts them in the right stance, in the right pose. So now if I selecting my first person camera component, I can reposition that so that it is right where the head of the third person character is. So we've got some consistency. And I should be able to compile. Yep. And I should be able to play. Yes, we can play. And we can shoot. And we get recoil and we get sound. Isn't that fantastic? So having set up all that stuff, and our third person's able to shoot as well. So that we're getting a little bit of a shooting match. I kill him. Again, we haven't reparented the gun for third person characters yet. We'll figure that out in future lectures. But now with C++, we've achieved a lot of what we had in Blueprint. So pat yourselves on the back for doing that, mostly without me holding your hands. And we've just gone through and seen how that's done. Let's just overview what we've achieved in this lecture. We have created and reparented a camera C++ class. We've converted our component hierarchy over to C++, and we have converted our firing function over to C++. And we've reviewed my mannequin code, which you are free to go and do. The link is in the resources. So great work, great start on converting some of that blueprint to C++, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Phew.
I checked the stream, it doesn't work for cold visitors, so I've set it as unmonetized. You get a really nasty bug as it in an incognito browser. Just kind of flashes and flickers. So I've set it as unmonetized, but once the recording's finished, we should probably remonetize it. Not that it really matters. I mean, I'm not putting massive numbers exactly.